The phone buzzed at 3:07 a.m., its glow slicing through the darkness, and Emma's trembling hand reached for it, her chest tightening as she read Daniel's message. "We need to talk." Her heart collapsed into silence. She whispered, "Why now? Why this hour?" And her tears blurred the words, as if her mind already knew the ending. Daniel had promised her forever, promised she was his tomorrow, yet this sudden sting at midnight felt like betrayal dressed as truth. Emma thought of all the times she stayed awake just to hear his voice, and now she was rewarded with a knife in text form. The room felt too small, suffocating, like every mile of distance pressed its weight on her lungs. Daniel once said, "Distance is just geography, not love." But geography now felt like a graveyard where love was buried. She curled against the pillow, clutching it like his absence could be replaced by cotton. Every second without his explanation burned hotter than fire, and she thought of the shadow of another woman, the rival she had feared, breathing where she could not. "Was I never enough?" she whispered into the dark. The silence answered louder than words. Emma lay motionless, replaying every promise Daniel ever made, each word echoing like broken glass in her memory. He once said, "You are my tomorrow," but tonight it felt like she was only his past. Her heart begged for reason, but reason refused to answer. Daniel had told her that oceans could never drown love, yet now distance felt like a wall she could not climb. Emma whispered, "Was it me, or was it never us?" The silence stretched louder than thunder, swallowing every last word she had trusted. Her phone buzzed again with Daniel's name, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Fear outweighed longing. She stared at it, paralyzed, as though the truth waiting on the other end would shatter what little was left of her fragile heart. Emma remembered how Daniel once laughed, "Nothing could break us." Now that promise echoed cruelly, a lie carved in memory. She whispered, "Then why am I breaking alone?" The words sank into silence, leaving only her pulse racing like a drum of grief. Emma sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen where Daniel's old messages still glowed faintly, as if time refused to erase them. He had once written, "Every sunrise is ours, no matter the distance." She clung to those words like lifelines, but tonight they felt fragile. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths as she whispered, "You were supposed to be here." Every hour she stayed awake for him became proof of her devotion, but Daniel's silence turned each second into a punishment. She remembered their late-night calls, when his laugh filled the emptiness of her small apartment, and she believed in forever. She thought of his promises that oceans couldn't drown them, that love was unbreakable. Yet now, even surrounded by books and glowing screens, she felt caged inside loneliness. Emma said softly, "I built my days around your tomorrows." The weight of her sacrifices pressed on her shoulders like chains. She had traded opportunities, skipped gatherings, and endured years of longing, all for love she hoped was waiting on the other side of the world. The clock ticked past midnight, and Emma remembered how Daniel once stayed awake just to say goodnight. That memory stabbed her as she sat in silence, phone in her hand like a stone. She wanted to believe love was still alive, but doubt dripped like poison into her veins. She whispered, "Do you even think of me anymore?" Her voice cracked against the emptiness of her room. She thought of her friends who moved on, who told her she was wasting her youth, waiting for a man across oceans. But Emma believed distance was just a challenge, not a death sentence. She had faith in his words when he said, "Home is wherever you are." Tonight, those words felt like abandoned echoes, hollow and cruel. She gripped her phone tighter, scrolling through old photos of them laughing together, every smile a reminder of what was now slipping through her hands. Emma's best friend Sarah had warned her countless times. "Love shouldn't feel like waiting in an empty room," Sarah once said with brutal honesty. Emma remembered those words now, hearing them louder than her own heart. She wanted to defend Daniel, to argue that distance was the only villain. But deep down, the silence told a harsher truth. Sarah's voice echoed, "If he wanted to, he would." Emma clenched her jaw, unwilling to surrender hope, but her heart trembled with cracks. She whispered, "You don't know him like I do." Yet she knew Sarah was right. Emma had spent years building her world around late-night calls, scattered visits, and fragile promises. She wondered if her devotion had become her prison. Her love felt like carrying fire in her hands, bright, beautiful, but burning her alive. Emma's parents were not silent about their doubts. Her mother once said, "Long distance is not a marriage, it's a gamble." Her father sighed, shaking his head, saying, "You're wasting years on someone who's not here." Tonight, those words weighed heavy. Emma had fought for Daniel, defending his love against every judgment. She believed their bond was worth more than approval, worth more than time lost. Yet now she sat in her room hearing her parents' warnings echoing like thunder. She whispered, what if they were right all along? The thought clawed at her heart, filling her chest with guilt. She remembered dinners where she excused herself early just to catch Daniel's call, ignoring her family's hurt eyes. She wondered if she had sacrificed more than she could afford, if the price of love had been too high to pay. Emma clutched her phone, scrolling through Daniel's old voice notes, replaying his laughter as though it could stitch her breaking heart. His words once carried her through sleepless nights. "We'll make it, Emma. Nothing can stop us." Now those same words felt like lies dressed as comfort. She pressed play again and again, craving his presence in echoes, desperate to believe he still cared. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I gave you my todays. Did you ever mean your tomorrows?" The voice note ended, leaving her room flooded with silence so heavy it felt suffocating. She sank into her chair, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her heart refusing to surrender its hope. The sound of his voice, though distant, was still the anchor she clung to in the storm. Emma checked her phone again, her thumb swiping at a blank screen. No missed calls, no messages, nothing but silence, echoing louder than any words Daniel could send. She whispered, "You said you'd call tonight." The clock mocked her with every tick, dragging minutes like chains. She remembered when his voice filled these hours, turning her loneliness into something bearable. But now it was just static emptiness. She scrolled their old messages, Daniel's promises glowing like fragile ghosts. Forever, always, nothing can break us. Her chest tightened as doubt coiled deeper. Did forever expire without her noticing? She said to herself, "If love is alive, it speaks." The silence was a cruel answer. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, yet the cold seeped through. Jealousy struck when she thought of his laughter elsewhere, maybe with someone who didn't have to count hours. Her body trembled, as if distance had become a disease spreading inside her veins. Daniel's promises once felt unshakable, but now Emma replayed them in her mind like songs out of tune. She whispered, "You told me distance was nothing, but why does it feel like everything?" She stared at her dark screen, imagining his smile, his charm, the words that had hooked her heart. Yet she wondered if those same words were now whispered to someone else. The thought poisoned her veins, leaving her shaking with doubt. She leaned back against the wall, her head hitting it softly, eyes closing as exhaustion burned in her chest. Her heart whispered a prayer, "Please don't let this be the end," but her mind screamed the opposite. Her pulse throbbed in her temples as she fought the jealousy growing wild inside her. Every unanswered call was a betrayal, every hour of silence an admission. She wanted to believe, but belief was slipping like sand through her hands. Emma's mind conjured images she didn't want, Daniel's laughter with another woman, someone closer, someone real. She saw the rival in every shadow, a ghost with a smile she couldn't fight. She whispered, "Is she the reason you're silent?" Her jealousy burned like fire, spreading fast, suffocating reason. She clenched her phone so tightly, her knuckles whitened, as if crushing it could crush her doubts. Daniel had once sworn, "No one could ever take your place," but now those words tasted bitter. She imagined him sitting at a cafe, smiling across the table at someone else, while she sat here counting hours. The ache twisted her stomach until she bent forward, pressing her forehead to her knees. She said softly, "I've given everything, And I'm still not enough. The silence around her pulsed like an answer she feared, but couldn't deny. Sarah noticed the change in Emma's voice, the cracks breaking through her words, and she didn't stay silent. "Emma, you're holding on to someone who's letting go," Sarah said over a late-night call. Emma bit her lip, eyes filling with tears, and whispered back, "But he loves me." Sarah's voice softened but stayed firm. "Love isn't silence. Love shows up." Emma closed her eyes, wishing Sarah's words weren't true, but they pierced her deeper than Daniel's distance. She wanted to push her away, to insist Sarah was wrong, but the truth burned too bright. Emma thought of all the times she had excused Daniel, covering his absence with hope, defending him to her family and friends. But tonight her defenses cracked. "What if I lose him?" she whispered, trembling. Sarah replied, "You're already losing yourself." The words shattered her, because they sounded like the truth she feared most. The days blurred together, Emma waking each morning, hoping for a message that never came. Her chest ached as she whispered, "Every sunrise I wait, and every night I break." Daniel's absence was no longer an accident. It was a pattern, a wound reopening daily. She remembered how he once sent her good morning texts before the sun even reached her window, and now the same window only framed emptiness. Emma's hands shook as she scrolled endlessly, searching for his name, but silence filled every space where love should have been. She thought of his promises again and again, each one turning into knives cutting her hope. She pressed her forehead against the glass of her window, watching the city lights blur through tears, her reflection broken and pale. She whispered, "You promised I was your tomorrow, but you gave your todays to someone else." Emma's phone finally lit up after days of silence. A message from Daniel arriving like a storm. "I've been meaning to tell you something." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The words cut her like blades. "There's someone else." She froze, breath caught in her chest, as if oxygen had been stolen from the room. Her heart raced violently, her pulse louder than the ticking clock. She whispered, "No, you promised me forever." Tears blurred her vision as she reread the message, each word hammering a nail into the coffin of her hope. Her knees buckled and she slid to the floor, clutching the phone as if she could squeeze the lie out of it. All the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the waiting, it all unraveled in a single confession typed without hesitation. She whispered, Daniel's name like a prayer broken in two. "Daniel, how could you?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Her chest heaved as she scrolled through the rest of Daniel's words. He admitted he had been seeing someone for months, that the long distance had been too much. Emma's body shook as she whispered, "Months, while I waited for you." Her vision blurred as rage and sorrow collided, burning her from inside. She remembered the nights she defended him to everyone, telling Sarah, telling her parents, that Daniel was different, that his love was real. The betrayal was suffocating, wrapping its hands around her throat. She pressed her forehead to the cold floor, sobbing into the silence. Emma cried, "I gave you everything, and you gave me lies." Her voice cracked, echoing like a ghost in her empty room. She realized she had loved a shadow, a man who had already given his heart to someone else while feeding her fragments of hope. In her rage, Emma opened social media and typed his name, Daniel's face appearing in smiling pictures with another woman. They stood close, eyes locked, hands brushing like lovers. Emma's throat closed as she whispered, "It's her." She was real. Her jealousy ignited into flames that burned hotter than grief. She zoomed in on every photo, analyzing every detail, torturing herself with proof of betrayal. The rival's smile was confident, effortless, the kind Emma had never been able to wear while drowning in waiting. Emma said through clenched teeth, "Was she your today while I was your tomorrow?" She slammed the phone down on the desk, her chest rising and falling like she had just run a marathon. Every image on the screen tore her apart, yet she couldn't look away. She felt like a stranger in her own love story. Sarah's voice on the phone was sharp when Emma called. "I told you," Sarah said, her words slicing through Emma's sobs. Emma choked out, "He promised me. He swore I was the only one." Sarah sighed, her tone mixing pity with anger. He wanted comfort, Emma, not commitment. Emma pressed the phone to her ear, wishing Sarah's words weren't true, but knowing they were. She said weakly, "I built my life around him." Sarah's reply was merciless. "And he built his life without you." Emma collapsed into sobs, feeling the truth settle like a stone crushing her ribs. The loyalty she wore like armor had become her greatest wound. Her hands shook as she whispered, "How do I let go?" Sarah's silence was heavy, then she said, "By remembering who you are without him." The line crackled, but the truth rang louder than static. Emma stared at the phone in her lap long after Sarah hung up, her tears dried but her body trembling. She whispered to herself, "All those years, and I was just holding on to ashes." The weight of betrayal pressed so heavy that even breathing felt like breaking. She remembered Daniel's voice saying, "Forever," the word echoing now like a cruel joke. She picked up the phone and hovered over his name, her finger trembling, torn between calling him and deleting him forever. Her heart screamed to hear his voice one last time, but her mind begged for release. She whispered, "You loved me with half a heart while giving the rest away." Her hands finally dropped the phone, letting it fall to the bed. She sat still in the silence, the truth settling inside her like a scar too deep to ever heal. Emma's hands shook as she finally dialed Daniel's number, the ringing sound pounding like war drums in her ears. When he answered, his voice was calm, almost careless. "Emma, I didn't want you to find out like this." Her chest clenched as she screamed, "Then why did you let me waste years on your lies?" Her tears blurred her vision, but anger burned through her words like fire. Daniel sighed. "It wasn't lies, I loved you, but I couldn't keep living in a world of waiting." Emma gasped, feeling her world collapse under him, admitting it so easily. She whispered through gritted teeth, "You promised me tomorrow, but you gave your 2 days away." Her voice cracked into sobs, raw and trembling. The silence that followed felt colder than the distance ever had. His sigh came again, soft and sharp. "I never meant to hurt you." Emma cried, "But you did, Daniel, you killed us." Emma's sobs turned into fury as she shouted, "You built a life without me while I gave up everything?" Daniel's voice cracked. "It wasn't that simple." She spat back. "It was simple. You wanted freedom more than me." The silence on his end was suffocating, proof she was right. Her voice trembled but sharpened. "Do you even realize what I sacrificed for you? Every moment I waited, every chance I lost, because I believed in us." Daniel's tone turned defensive. "I didn't ask you to give up your life." Her breath hitched as rage erupted. "No, you didn't have to ask. I gave it because I loved you." The words rang heavy in the air, echoing like thunder. His reply was a whisper. "I couldn't carry the weight anymore." Emma's chest caved, her voice shattering. "Then why did you let me carry it alone?" Emma's voice broke as she whispered, "I stayed when it hurt, I believed when no one else did. I loved you more than my own life." Daniel's voice came low, guilt dripping from every syllable. "And I loved you, but not enough to endure forever like this." Emma's body trembled, as if struck by lightning. She screamed, "Not enough? You swore I was your everything." Daniel's voice faltered, "You were, but distance changed me." Emma fell to her knees, sobbing, words tearing out of her throat. "No, Daniel, you changed you. I held on, you let go." His silence weighed heavier than any confession, like a coffin closing over what they once were. She whispered brokenly, "You didn't just break us, you broke me." Emma's voice softened to a deadly calm, her rage exhausted into despair. She whispered, "Do you love her?" The question hung like a knife. Daniel paused, his silence longer than any words. Finally, his voice came, quiet but clear. "Ice." Emma's heart shattered into pieces, her chest tightening until breathing felt impossible. She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks in silence. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Then why did you keep me waiting in the dark?" Daniel's voice faltered, "Because I couldn't let go of you. Not yet." Emma's face twisted in pain, her voice shaking. "So I was your habit, while she was your choice." His silence confirmed everything. Emma's body went cold. as though love itself had died in her arms. Emma's tears slowed, replaced by a hollow stillness. She whispered, "This is the moment I stop waiting." Her words cracked, but carried a finality Daniel couldn't ignore. He stuttered, "Emma," but she cut him off, voice trembling yet sharp. "No, don't say my name like it still belongs to you." Her hand shook as she pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at his face one last time. Daniel whispered, "I'm sorry," but the word felt too small for the devastation he caused. Emma's thumb hovered over the screen, and she whispered, "You were my forever, and I was just your meantime." With one final breath, she ended the call. The silence that followed was louder than any scream, a silence that would never be filled again. Emma sat in silence long after the call ended, the room heavy with the echo of Daniel's last words. Her phone lay face down on the bed, as if even its glow was too cruel to look at. She whispered, "It's over." The words felt foreign, jagged, tearing her throat on their way out. She sat perfectly still, listening to the emptiness pressing against her chest. For years, her world had revolved around waiting, counting time zones, rearranging her life for his promises. Now there was nothing left to wait for. She closed her eyes, the image of Daniel's face burned into her mind, but no longer warm, only cold and distant. Tears rolled silently as she whispered, "I gave you my days, and you gave me goodbye." The stillness of the room grew unbearable, but within that silence, something small stirred, freedom dressed as grief. The next morning, sunlight pierced through her curtains, painting her room with gold she hadn't seen in weeks. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the light, as if it were foreign. She whispered, "The world didn't end." Her chest still ached, her heart still cracked, but the sun reminded her that time moved even when love stopped. She stretched her fingers slowly, unclenching fists that had been curled in rage and grief. She thought of Daniel with someone else, and the pain twisted her stomach, but she also felt an unfamiliar calm. For the first time in years, there were no messages to wait for, no calls to lose sleep over. The silence was painful, but also honest. Emma exhaled, a long trembling breath, whispering, "Maybe this is where I begin again." Later that day, Emma sat at her desk, staring at her reflection in the black screen of her laptop. She saw swollen eyes, red cheeks, and a face she barely recognized. She whispered, "Who am I without him?" The question trembled in the air, heavier than she expected. She thought of Sarah's words, "You're losing yourself," and realized how true they had been. Emma opened her journal, the pages filled with scribbled quotes and promises Daniel once made. She hesitated, then began to write, her pen scratching against paper. "I am still here." The act felt small but powerful, reclaiming a piece of herself she thought was gone. She whispered to the empty room, "I am not just the girl who waited." For the first time, her words were not for him but for herself. Her parents noticed the silence in her eyes when she joined them for dinner. Her mother reached out, hand brushing against Emma's. "He hurt you, didn't he?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her father sighed, his voice steady but soft. "Sometimes letting go is the only strength left." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue this time. She whispered, "I thought love could survive oceans." Her mother's gaze softened. "Some loves can't even survive a room." Emma looked down at her plate, the ache heavy but also less lonely. For the first time she let her parents' words sink in, not as criticism, but as care. She realized they weren't trying to take away her love, they were trying to give her back herself. That night, Emma sat by her window, city lights glowing beyond the glass. The ache still pressed inside her chest, but she felt a fragile strength returning. She whispered, "I'm still breathing." She thought of Daniel, of the woman who had replaced her, and though pain surged, it didn't consume her the same way. She realized the worst had already happened. She had been betrayed, broken, left behind, and yet she remained. Her lips trembled, but she smiled faintly through tears. She whispered, "This hurt will heal, even if the scar stays." She placed her hand on the glass, feeling the cool surface, and let the night air seep through the open crack of the window. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for a call. She was just existing, scarred but alive. Emma walked through the city streets, her breath visible in the cold night air. She held her phone in her hand, not to wait for his call, but to finally delete his name. Each step echoed against the pavement like a drumbeat of farewell. She whispered, "I am not your tomorrow anymore." The words lingered on her lips, strange but freeing. The pain still lived in her chest, but beneath it was something steady, something new. She stopped at a street corner watching couples pass by laughing, holding hands. The sight stung, but she didn't crumble this time. She whispered to herself, "I'm still here." For the first time, she realized survival was its own kind of victory. Her scars would remain, but she would wear them as proof that she had loved and endured. She sat down on a park bench under a flickering street lamp, the world quiet except for the wind rustling through the trees. Emma unlocked her phone one last time, scrolling through Daniel's messages. Every "I love you," every "forever," burned her eyes like lies written in fire. Her finger hovered over the delete button, trembling, yet steady enough to end it. She whispered, "Goodbye, Daniel." Her chest felt hollow but lighter. With one tap, the history vanished, and silence became her witness. For years, his words had defined her nights and her days. Now, there was nothing left but space, empty, painful, but hers. Emma leaned back on the bench, looking up at the sky, the stars faint behind city haze. She remembered when Daniel once said, "When you look at the moon, know I'm looking too." Now, the same moon felt like betrayal. She whispered, "The sky never lied." "You did." Her chest rose with a shaky breath, and she closed her eyes, letting the cold air wash over her. The ache still lingered, but beneath it was resolve. She said softly, "I will never wait for you again." Her voice trembled, but rang like a vow carried into the night. The wind tugged at her hair as Emma rose from the bench, slipping her phone into her pocket. She whispered, "Love didn't die. It just moved on without me." Each step away from that place felt like walking out of a graveyard where she had buried her tomorrows. She thought of Sarah's words, her parents' warnings, and her own broken prayers. For the first time she did not resist the truth. They had been right, but she had needed to learn it on her own. Emma's voice cracked but carried strength. "I won't be a shadow anymore." The night embraced her with silence, not as punishment, but as promise. Emma paused at the crosswalk, the city alive around her, neon lights reflecting in her tear-streaked eyes. She whispered the final words she would ever speak to him, though he would never hear them. "You were my forever, but I was only your meantime." The traffic lights shifted, and she stepped forward into the night, her figure swallowed by the glow of headlights and city haze. That was the last moment Daniel's name ever lived on her lips. The story of waiting had ended, and though her heart carried scars, she walked into tomorrow without him.